Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm Amber Thompson, owner of AT College Consulting. I'm an independent educational consultant, and I work individually with students and families to find colleges that match their academic, social, and financial needs. My goal is always to empower students to be actively involved in the college search process while understanding their unique needs and aspirations. As a trusted partner in the process, I cherish getting to know my families and students so that I can emphasize the excitement and possibilities of the college journey while minimizing the stress. Tonight, it is an absolute pleasure to have Sheila Miller-Nelson, communications expert and founder of Midian Consulting, joining me this evening. Sheila is a longtime friend, as we actually both have 3 children who are the exact same ages. So we've been running in many of the same circles for the past decade. Not only does Sheila help businesses across the South Bay improve their positive communication habits, but she also works with students, teaching them how to build effective communication skills and boost self-confidence in that area. I personally attended one of Sheila's workshops over Zoom, where she taught the participants how to build effective communication skills in this new virtual space that we all interact in these days. So for all these reasons, I knew that Sheila was the perfect addition to this workshop on college interviewing. And in fact, this is a follow-up to an article we wrote together that appeared in the November issue of the El Segundo Scene. And I personally had so much fun chatting with Sheila about college interviewing that we thought it would be a great idea to bring this into the workshop space so that we could continue to boost students' self-confidence in regards to interviewing. So now I'm going to let Sheila introduce herself and tell you about her background.
Thank you, Amber, and welcome everybody. My name is Sheila Miller-Nelson, and communication is something we do so frequently that we often don't ever think about prepping or practicing it. And then we get under the microscope, or in this case, in the camera eye, and we can feel frustrated and flustered and tongue-tied and stressed. And that doesn't lead to a good experience for anyone. So I created Midian LLC, and I've taken 2 sides of my background. I have a BA in speech communications. I'm a certified sign language interpreter. I worked as a senior trainer for Dale Carnegie for 10 years, and I'm currently on faculty with the American Management Association. That's one pillar. And the other side is my business career that I had almost 17 years in aerospace as a project management professional. No matter where I've gone, though, in life, I have realized that the communication is so critical and key to everything that we do, whether it was managing million-dollar projects where one miscommunication could really do a lot of damage, or in this case with students, where you say, hey, I've really got my sights set on maybe a specific school or doing a specific thing, and I'm competent, but I'm not necessarily getting that across, or I need some help in getting that across. So my goal is to help elevate your communication and increase your confidence to showcase your competence.
Wonderful. Thank you. See, I told you all that she was my perfect partner in crime this evening. So tonight we have several goals. First, we're going to cover the basics of interviewing, the who, what, when, where, why, how. We're going to focus on ways to increase your confidence, which Sheila just elaborated upon, through preparation, practice, and that all-important self-reflection piece, which is something I focus a lot on in the college admissions arena. And we're going to focus on several of the on-camera considerations. So figuring out how to authentically engage when you're looking into that camera's eye. And Sheila will definitely have tips on making sure you have an energetic delivery. I think when most students are faced with the prospect of interviewing, whether it's for college or a job or an internship, it's natural to experience some hesitancy and wonder if you're prepared. However, I want to confidently assert that yes, you are ready for this conversation, Because after all, the bulk of the questions that are going to be asked in this interview space are going to be about you, and nobody knows you better than you. So I'm confident that you're prepared. However, we are here tonight to learn strategies to increase your confidence even more. So let's dive in. So I wanted to start just with the basics. What should you expect in the interview situation? So there are three types of people that you perhaps will interview with. The first is an admissions rep. The second, and this is becoming quite common, is that you have the opportunity to interview with a current student. And often it's a highly trained senior who works in admission. And I always am really excited when students get to interview with a current student, because I think one, it takes a little bit of the stress off because it's easier to engage with someone who's closer to your own age. There's an increased comfort level there, as well as you really get to tap into that, current student vibe on campus. And of course, the third possible person you might interview with would be an alumni. When students might interview is also a common question. And really the earliest that you would interview would be the spring of your junior year. Most typically, though, they're happening more in your senior year. And often there are schools that don't even allow you to book an interview until after you've hit the submit button on your college application. So these can really run anywhere from spring of junior year all the way through, maybe January, February of your senior year. The key component to remember, I think, is to make sure that you are interviewing when you are ready. And some colleagues were emphasizing that in order to be ready, you need to be able to think beyond high school. So if you're, a late junior and you're just struggling to sort of even conceive of what senior year might be like, it's probably not a good idea to interview just yet. So you need to really be able to think outside of high school and start to envision what your college life might look like. Now, these interviews back in the day took place in a very, wide range number of places, and I trust that they will get back to multiple spaces as well. Really, currently, most of the interviews are taking space in this virtual environment on Zoom. However, there are some institutions that are doing on-campus interviews. There are some local opportunities when an admissions rep travels around to different geographic zones, and they might, invite you to have an interview at the park. There can also be organized larger sessions, and I anticipate that we'll return to some of those opportunities once we're, more further removed from the pandemic. So you might wonder what the purpose of interviewing is. And I like this quote from Allison Slater, who is an admissions rep from Denison University, which is a small liberal arts college. And she really establishes the bigger picture goal of the interview process. And she says, we get more personality through an interview. The chance to get to know somebody as a real person is almost always advantageous. So as Ms. Slater emphasizes, interviewing really humanizes you as a student. You are able to show your enthusiasm through your voice. You're able to reveal what motivates you through the stories that you share. You're able to showcase your intellectual vitality through any of the questions that you might ask. And essentially, you are also going to be able to serve a very practical purpose of showing demonstrated interest in the college. After all, it certainly takes effort to book an interview and to go through the process. So students who commit to that interview process are letting the university college know that, hey, I'm definitely interested in attending your university. And really, essentially, this interview helps the school identify if you might be a good fit for them, but it also helps you identify if you are a good fit for the school, if it's a good fit for you. So the process really goes both ways. And Ms. Slater today in the workshop that I was attending emphasized that when she gets to know a student in this interview space, she is then able to really go to bat for that student in the admissions process because she's gotten to know the student much more, in much more depth through that interview. if we're looking at a situation where they're not sure, perhaps they're in a committee and they're not sure if they want to admit you or not, and she's interviewed with you, she can go to bat for you and really talk about your strengths because you've had that deeper conversation. So these are some of the sample questions that you might encounter in an interview. And there are so many resources on the internet that will provide common lists of interview questions. And some colleges are even so transparent about this that they post their interview questions online. So you really have the opportunity to prepare in advance. As I was going through the stacks of these different questions that I was able to look through, I notice that they really fell into three main categories. So there are personal questions. For example, what is your family like? What are your extracurriculars that you're passionate about? If you had a free day, how might you spend that? There are also going to be questions about your high school, because after all, that's what you've been engaged in for the last 4 years. So they might ask what your favorite class has been and why, who your favorite teacher is, again, and why. What has your high school experience been like, actually? And oftentimes they'll ask, what do you like about your high school and what would you change if you could? Or perhaps, how would your teachers describe you? So many questions are revolving around your high school experience. And then there are the college questions that you definitely need to be prepared to answer. So they might ask you what you're interested in studying in college. And they are definitely going to ask you why you were interested in applying to this school. And we're going to cover that in much more detail later. And they're also going to be wondering what you might contribute to their college. And another thing that Ms. Slater emphasized today is that really keeping in mind that college is a mutually beneficial relationship. So not only are you going there to get a great education, but the college is also getting a great community member. And part of this interview process is helping them gauge in an interview how you might contribute on campus and the type of community member you might be. Now, I do want to pause here and answer a question that was posed in the registration process about extracurriculars. And the question was, what if I don't particularly engage in extracurriculars in my high school, or perhaps, it's an online school where there aren't extracurriculars at that brick and mortar institution because it's an online school. And I just want to emphasize that colleges really have a very broad view of what extracurriculars are. These do not have to be activities that are taking place within the four walls of your high school institution. Pretty much, if it's something that you are passionate about, you are spending your free time, outside of your studies. If you're spending time about it, the colleges want to know about it, and they genuinely, sincerely care about what you are interested in. So perhaps it's a hobby that you've passionately pursued. Perhaps you're an avid reader and you can wax prolific about all sorts of different types of fiction or nonfiction, whatever your jam is. Perhaps you're very passionate about a particular issue that really lights your fire. So just keep in mind that extracurriculars are really just anything that excites you and that you spend your free time involved in high school. Okay, so we've taken a look at some of the types of questions that you might be asked in the interview process. And when you have a sense of what you might be asked, you can then start to prepare for the conversation. And one of the best strategies for preparing is to make sure that you have three main things that you want to communicate about yourself no matter what. And this is essentially something that colleagues have identified as the silver platter concept, where you envision delivering 3 personalized treats on a lovely silver platter to your interviewer. Now, clearly you're not bringing cupcakes to the interview, though that would be delicious. So let's dive into what this metaphor might be. So these 3 treats, my 3 cupcake analogy, really are the 3 top qualities that you want to share about yourself. Perhaps you want to communicate your top values, that you are hardworking, empathetic, and loyal. You might want them to know about 1 or 2 of your proudest achievements or the impact you've been able to make in a certain community. or perhaps it's a fascination that you have with a particular subject that really keeps you up at night. Above all else, you need to have a solid understanding of those top 3 qualities that you want to share. So those 3 cupcakes that you want to deliver on that silver platter to the interviewer before the conversation is over. And one of the most powerful ways to deliver these 3 qualities, is through stories. After all, if I say I'm hardworking, empathetic, and loyal, and I leave it at that, the interviewer really has learned pretty much nothing about me. So Sheila, this is where I would love for you to chat about how students can use the power of stories to really convey their top 3 qualities.
Sure. Well, the 3 qualities that I have are resourceful, independent, and inclusive. And again, if I just leave those out there, they're fairly meaningless and they're subject to interpretation. So when I am asked in the interview a question, I can instead impart with a short story. And that's one of the things, I know it talks about storytelling here at 30 seconds, 45 seconds. So we're not talking about an extremely lengthy story. So this is something that you'll want to not only think about, but practice. And it could look something like this. When I was a freshman and I got to my first biomed class, I really struggled with the concept of genomes and some of the in-depth things that we were talking about there. And it was a little foreign to me because I was usually pretty ahead of the class, or at least in line with the class. So to be falling behind and not understanding was a little bit of a challenge for me. So instead of going to the teacher outside of class, I actually decided to go to the library and seek out other resources. And that seemed pretty clinical to me. So I thought, well, where on earth could I go to actually have this be more meaningful to me? And fortunately, I had a doctor's appointment that week. So I asked my doctor if he could spare a few extra moments and really talk about this concept of genomes with me and show me in a way that would make sense to me, like showing me on my chart and talking to me about my history. And it really clicked when that happened. About a week later, I noticed that somebody at the next table over, Kendra, was having some difficulties as well. I could hear her frustration out loud. And so I decided to impart my wisdom that I had gained to her. We took some extra lunch periods and so forth. And I tell you that story to show you that I am not only resourceful, but I can work independently and that I'm inclusive of others, because I realize that I shouldn't, all the good things that I learn and the things that I know, I shouldn't keep here, that I should extend them out into the world. So that could be a short story to express, first of all, let me back that up, a real story. So sometimes people say, oh, well, let me make something up that sounds good that will fit my 3 words. We definitely don't want to do that. If they are 3 words, you should be that you feel that you embody, they should be something that you are capable with coming up with a story. And it doesn't have to be something that is neatly bundled like that. It can be a few sentences about a time when this happened, a time when that happened. But the idea being that instead of just laying out 3 words or giving some dry sentences, I work independently, I don't need a lot of help, those types of things, they're very dry. And to Amber's point, they don't show your personality and they don't really let that interviewer get to know you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for indulging us in that story. I appreciated it very much. So Sheila, let's talk about how we can really take advantage of the virtual space. This is something that I learned a lot from you in the workshop that you did a few months back for the LA Coastal Chamber. So yeah, take us down some tips for really engaging authentically and really making the most of the camera that is in front of us on our computer.
It's not natural. That's the first thing I'll come out and say, is it takes some practice to get accustomed to looking at that camera lens and actually talking into it as though you were talking to people. So right now, as I'm looking into the camera lens, that hopefully is giving you the impression of making a connection, of giving you eye contact. when in fact your pictures are down over here. So I'm not really seeing you. I have two choices to make though. I can either serve myself and look down here and look at everybody and then you see something else, or I can serve you and look into the camera lens. So again, it takes some practice and it takes some getting used to, but once you've done it, it really, when you see what it looks like on the other side versus looking down at the screen or looking at someone or looking at my notes down here and talking to my notes down here, there's a huge difference. And again, that goes back to that connecting and letting your personality shine through. So I would say if nothing else that you learn or take away from tonight regarding this specifically about presenting on camera, that would be the number one thing, is to look directly into the camera lens. And then we have on the list here as well, taping your notes, not copious notes, not lots of words, a few words, some things that subtle hints that will help you remember, or maybe not so subtle, right? Some words taped in different colors right next to the camera so that you don't have to look down and look away, excuse me, or look to the side. We just want to stay as focused as we can on the person on the other side of that camera. Let's see. So I am standing, which you may think sounds not comfortable. And so it does say stand up comfortable. The challenge when we sit is we can tend to get a little too comfortable, a little too relaxed. I've seen arms come up, this kind of thing, or arms crossed, we slouch back a little bit. So if you are in an environment where you can stand and it's comfortable enough for you, this isn't going to be an all-day event. Find some good shoes, right? Put yourself in some solid tennis shoes or something with some support underneath them so that you're able to stand up. It helps your whole body's energy. It helps with your breathing, etc. So I do encourage standing if it's not going to make you so uncomfortable. And then the last thing on there, do something physically active before. This really speaks to the nervousness. So even if you say, well, I don't really get nervous, that's fine. Go ahead and do something physical. Even if you can't jog around the block, which is fine, you can do some finger stretches or squeeze your toes or that sort of thing. So even during the interview process, if you're feeling a little bit tense, go ahead and just squeeze your toes in your shoes, right? Squeeze your knees together. Something that is subtle that won't be seen on camera. So we probably want to not opt for the shoulder shrugs. And there are plenty of other tips, but again, if you took nothing away from this portion tonight except for looking in the camera lens, that's the one that I would say is really going to help connect with your audience.
Absolutely. When we were chatting to prepare for the El Segundo Scene article, I loved your tip about writing the keywords, clear, large, and in different colors. I made a little sample for myself this evening. I just love the whole concept of the different colors. That to me was a really nice distinguishing factor and great tip.
Well, and it helps with the periphery, right? If they're large and in different colors, and maybe not all on the same Post-it note, maybe you just have 3 Post-it notes or something similar there, so that you can see them in your periphery without really having to look away and read something over here. And again, the person on the other end is not expecting you to be a professional speaker. It's just something that you can do to help yourself. And it's really one of those things, if everyone going in has 11 AP classes and has a 4.8 and has been on 3 extracurricular teams, this is one of those differences that can really set you apart, is just how you come across, especially when it has to be, or it's going to be over the wire like this.
Exactly. Okay, now we are going to dive into some of the most common questions that students are asked. And this is the all-intimidating yet super common question, tell me about yourself. And very commonly, interviewers will just begin with this question because maybe 1, they haven't prepared. 2, they might think, I'm going to toss them an easy question. However, this question can certainly stump students unless you've thought about the answer. So Sheila, can you tell us how students can think about and prepare an answer to this uber broad question?
Yeah, two ways to go with it. Usually there's either tell me in 5 to 8 sentences as much as you can about your life in general, right? That's the going broad, or going narrow. Pick one particular example. Maybe this leads back to one of those 3 silver platter cupcakes that you want to discuss. Start there and focus on that and let it blossom a little bit, but really talk maybe about your inclusivity. Let's just say that was one of my words. So I might tell a story about inclusivity and how I engage in it and how meaningful it is and that sort of thing. And just say, and then we can end with a statement about how I really try to flood inclusivity throughout all things that I do. So that really wasn't a whole tell me everything about yourself as a person, but we're either going to go at this big level where I went to this school, I have this family, I like these sports, etc. So that kind of broad, I touch a sentence on each thing, or going to that really, really kind of small, and I can still tell somebody a lot about myself, even though I'm focused on one particular thing.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I think that something else I learned from you is that you're in charge of picking how you actually answer that question, but it is key, of course, to then practice and make sure you know where you're going to start and where you're going to end. And I think one of the sentences that came through in the interview article was, it's going to be a disaster if you don't know where this rambling story might end. So if you know where you're beginning and you know where you're ending, it's going to be a much more sophisticated statement on your end.
So one of the things that in fact, I just taught it earlier today, is about a flight, a plane trip, right? People are most maybe nervous or interested or whatever, they perk up at the beginning, at takeoff and at landing. So if you have a solid takeoff, a solid opening, and a solid landing, don't let the person guess if you're done or not. In the middle, we can have some turbulence, we can have some bumps, you can make a mistake, have to say something over again, consult a note, all those sorts of things can happen in the middle. But that opening, that takeoff and that landing need to be solid. And it, yes, to your point, Amber, it absolutely needs to be practiced. And I have never talked to a person who said, oh, I'm so excited you told me to practice. I have so much extra time. I can't wait to practice. The challenge is, if we don't practice, we don't get a do-over. So how important is this to you, right? Because this is your reputation that you're putting out there. So how important is it to you that you're doing the best that you can, right? That you are showcasing your competence by doing this. And practicing is absolutely necessary for all of these answers. Whether or not you know the questions that they're going to ask you, we want to go ahead and just say things out loud. Don't mumble, don't just in your head. Actually say things over and over out loud, because you'll think, well, that didn't sound right, or oh my gosh, I hope I can't say that. That sounded terrible. And you'll be able to go through it 6, 10, 12, 20 times if you need to, until it starts becoming comfortable and natural to you. And that's when you'll also help reduce your stress level, because you'll know that you've already gone through these multiple times. But definitely the takeoff and the landing, for sure.
Love that analogy, for sure. So 2 other common interview categories of questions involve your strengths and your weaknesses. And with the strengths, it's really important to think about what kind of impact you can make on campus. So if we go back to what I was talking about before, the colleges are really trying to assess what type of community member you might be. So perhaps you have extensive experience getting a group of students excited about a particular cause. So if you have that skill, perhaps you can envision what that might allow you to do on a particular campus and the opportunities you might have. So it's really important to bring that sense of your strengths to an understanding of how it will make you a differentiator on this particular college campus. And Sheila, I was hoping that you could walk us through preparing for the challenging, what is your weakness question that we all as humans dread answering, but often have to encounter, whether it's, I know students when they do their senior brag sheet have to talk about one of their weaknesses, and it can often come up, and it's one that can be really, really personally a struggle to come up with an answer.
I think the middle bullet point there is right, that this isn't a devastating thing, right? We're all human. The person on the other end doesn't expect us to be perfect because they're not perfect. So saying, oh, I don't really have a weakness, or, well, my weakness is that I'm such a perfectionist, right? And trying to disguise it as, well, it's really not a weakness at all. So this is part of self-assessment and knowing yourself. Okay, so what am I not great at? What have I struggled with, or what do I struggle with? And then positioning it so that when the question is asked, which it likely will be asked, that we don't get the visual and kind of the emotive, oh, I'm so terrible at time management. I'm just, right. It's not this devastating thing. Again, practicing what we're going to say about it, that yes, I have this thing, pick one thing. If they ask for your weakness or a weakness, we don't want to give them 5. So after you come up with weaknesses that you have or things that you think you could do better, okay, what's one you think you can talk to, give an example of, and then talk about what you're doing to currently overcome that. How do you combat that weakness? Because we want them to know, hey, I know I could get better at time management. I know that I let some things get away from me. And here's what I'm doing, whether I'm working a new calendar system, I'm working with a Pomodoro type routine, whatever it is, to show them that, yeah, I'm not perfect. I'm not going to be perfect, but I am working toward getting better.
Absolutely. I love the acknowledgement that the interviewer is not expecting you to be perfect at all. And this whole experience humanizes the student for sure.
And I think a challenge, Amber, is that we have gotten to a place where this experience of interviewing can be so intense, or at least it's thought of that way. It's kind of hyped as the, oh my gosh, it's like the moment. And really, it's just people talking to other people. So they expect another human to be on the other side of things. And so practicing and knowing yourself are some of the best tools that you can, the best gifts that you can give yourself before you do this. And then just going in and allowing yourself to move or to smile or and to not be that robotic kind of, I'm the perfect person. Just be human. And that really says a lot, because they're looking to fill their campus with solid citizens, right? Not just with people who are the best of the best academically. They want real people there.
Absolutely. And I'm going to touch on this in a later slide, but I think it's worth repeating twice, is that the interviewer is not looking for reasons to not admit you. They are looking for reasons to admit you. So they are looking to find that human connection, to understand who you are, to see how you're going to be on their campus. So, and it's a common impression too, when they're reading your application file, is that they're looking for reasons to admit you, not to say no. I think that's often a misconception about what admissions readers do. They really are looking for that best in you and those reasons why you would fit well on their campus. Jill, I know you have some good ideas about how students should always support their statements and make sure that they always have so what to back up whatever claim that they are interjecting out there in the world. So do you have any additional statements on supporting whatever you're saying?
Just that, Amber, that if no matter what you say, whether it is your these are my three cupcakes, right? I am this kind of person, or I like this, or I do. Why? So what? Ask yourself to dig deeper, and not just one layer, one or two or a few layers, to find out why do you believe that, think that, like that, enjoy that, whatever it is, so that you can answer the deeper question and not just come up with the bulleted list. So sometimes it lends itself to the short little story I gave before about the biomed class. That's one way of doing it, but we want to make sure that anything that we say, any statement that we make, oh, I'm a really honest person. Okay, prove that to me, right? And I don't think that anyone will actually say it in those words, but we want to make sure that we have evidence to back that up, because that makes us right, that makes it more believable, and that makes it more realistic for the person on the other end.
Absolutely. The workshop that I attended, the admissions reps provided a few samples of statements that they write about the students. They're just mock samples that they write after that interview. And you can see the level of detail that can be presented in a sample write-up when they're actually when the students actually, taking that effort to communicate these stories. Because if you just have that one word quality characteristic, there's really not much for the individual to write down, and they're probably not even going to remember it to include it in their notes later if it was just one word. But if there's a whole story around it, they're going to remember that when they're writing up their notes and their reflections, and then they're going to remember that even more when they're going to bat for you in the admissions committee cycle.
And if they don't have the evidence, if you don't give them the evidence to back up your claim, whatever it is, it's easy for someone to then maybe misunderstand or misbelieve that maybe you don't have evidence. Maybe it is just something you picked out of thin air because it sounded like something you thought they might want to hear. And we don't want that, because you don't want to set up any sort of falsehoods about yourself. So just have proof for everything that you say.
Yeah, and that really touches on a really great point. I think that a lot of students fret about what they think the interviewer wants to hear. And the interviewer doesn't have these types of preconceived notions, because they know you are your own unique individual and they don't know what you're going to say. So they don't have these expectations that I think a lot of students put on the process. They want to hear you. They're not looking for particular canned answers. So really, I want you to all keep in mind that this interview is a conversation, and it is a chance for the interviewer to get to know you better, but also for you to get to know the college better. And so this is where we come into this concept of really understanding and diving deep into knowing why you are applying to this particular college. And oftentimes the colleges that are offering interviews are also going to ask you to write a why us essay in the application process. And so I always work with my students to help them really dive deep to figure out, okay, on one hand, what does this college offer? And on the other, what do you want in this college experience? And where these two intersect is the perfect explanation of why this college is right for you. So you really need to have an understanding of what is unique about this school and how that matches exactly with what you are looking for. So how you can go to this institution and take advantage of the opportunities that they are putting out there, so that you can grow and thrive in the way that you are hoping to personally grow and thrive. And ultimately, in this interview process, they're really trying to understand why you are applying to this school. So I always encourage students to know exactly, have 3 or 4 reasons why this college is a good fit. And you really have to show that you've done your research in that area. So at some point in this interview, you actually do get to ask the interviewer questions. And so Sheila, I was hoping you could help us understand how students can really showcase their intellectual curiosity through the types of questions they ask their interviewer.
Yeah. So as you were just mentioning, right, we want to figure out why this school. Am I applying because I just threw spaghetti at the wall to see what would stick, or what, right? Hopefully that's not the case. And we've selected these colleges and universities. So one of the things when it comes our turn to ask questions, we want to make sure that we're not throwing that time away, if you will. We really want to, again, show, maybe we didn't use inquisitive as one of our words, but this is a great way to demonstrate it. The first thing is, please do not ask them a question that you can find on Google. If you can search this answer and find it fairly readily, right? If it only takes you 5 to 10 minutes to find the answer to this question, how big is the campus? How many students? What kind of clubs do you have? All those sorts of things that you can find online or in brochures. We want to stay away from those specifically. We want to ask questions that are relevant to you. Again, this goes back to that proof. If I want to know about something about the band, why is that important for me to know? If I'm asking about how often the band travels, or does the band compete outside of football season, right? Hopefully I play an instrument, or I want to somehow be involved in the band, or else it kind of seems like a frivolous question that just, I don't know, just you asked me to ask a question, there you go. So definitely have questions that are meaningful to you. Maybe there is a club, you don't see a club listed that you would like to be a part of. Hey, what if I didn't see this club listed? I didn't see a robotics club listed. What is the process for a student starting a new club on campus? Is that something that I would be able to do? Right? Something along those lines that shows the meaningfulness to you. And that would be something that if they met you a year later, they would say, oh, that question made sense because I can see how it related to them now that they're on campus. You can also ask, remember we said this is a person who's either been to or works with the college. So feel free to ask them a question. Why, how long, it could be something simple like how long have you been there, but that's kind of I would say a throwaway question. More in depth like, right? What is your favorite memory of this college? Or why did you choose to come to work for this institution? What's one of the things that hasn't been in the news? Here's another great place for you to showcase. I saw an article where this patent was just approved, or for the science department. What are some of the other great things that have gone on in the science department or with the school this year? So you can ask them personal questions, because they probably, because they're doing this interview as well, they probably have lots of things to share with you. You might learn something, and at the same time, right, get some insight that you wouldn't get otherwise by asking them a question as well.
Absolutely. And often I encourage my students, if they've had an interview prior to submitting the application and writing this Why Us essay, they can gain really useful information through this interview that then might work its way very nicely and seamlessly into their Why Us essay, because they've learned something that perhaps very few other people have asked and know. So the commonality here with all of these questions that are currently on screen is that they will all encourage the interviewer to provide their own personal reflections. So they're going to have to really share their experience with you. And hopefully by doing that, you will better understand if this college is a good fit for you. Okay, we've talked a lot tonight about making sure you practice and prepare. But Sheila, talk to us why it's really critical to not memorize everything that you're going to say. And also maybe give us some good tips about who would make a good practice partner, and then maybe someone who's not a good practice partner.
Okay, great. I'm going to take that in reverse order. The person who is not your best partner is your best friend. And the reason is that that person will often let you get away with things that other people wouldn't. So, right? We're very comfortable. It's my best friend. I like them. They like me, etc. So they're going to let me get away with some things that probably I don't really want to get away with in terms of my practicing and preparing. So we want to turn to a trusted. It doesn't have to be an adult. It can be another student, but somebody that we trust in the manner that they will help us truly, that they have our best interest at heart, and that they will be confidential about it, right? That this isn't necessarily something that you want spread all over. Not that you're doing anything secretive, but just somebody who is really going to help you out and again have your best interest in mind. That and your parents, while I'm sure that they are cheering you on like crazy, again, one of two things can happen. As a parent, they can be too lenient, kind of like your best friend, or they can go the other direction. Well, I know this, or you should say this, or what about this? And so you get less practicing in and kind of more coaching. So it could be, I mean, there are myriad places to look. It could be someone in a club that you're in. It could be a teacher. It could be, like I said, another student. But just find someone who's kind of willing to sign a contract with you, if you will, and hold you accountable to not only practicing, but practicing well. Because sitting down over coffee, as I'm sipping my coffee and just kind of chit-chatting about stuff is not truly practicing. We want to practice the way that we're going to perform, the way that we're going to do this interview. So that can mean everything from the way that I dress. If it's going to be over Zoom, then we would want them to be on a Zoom call with us so that they can say, hey, you're really not looking at me, and those types of things, or talk about the lighting and just the circumstances that are going on here. Hey, you've got a mess behind you and some dirty dishes. That probably shouldn't happen. So those types of things. And then let's see. Oh, and then of course, just practicing and preparing in general, as we said, really important to, right, the takeoff and the landing for pretty much every question that we're going to prepare, have an idea. We don't want to memorize though, because I've seen it go very, very badly firsthand when someone has something memorized and they sneeze, the person interrupts, something else happens, or they just, for whatever reason, lose their place. It can be very hard to get on track. And then it seems very stiff and artificial. And as Amber said at the onset, we're trying to get our personality across. We're trying to put the human into this, even though it's over the wire. And we it's a little bit more, artificial when we're doing it with the memorization. And then also, what if they don't ask the exact question that you practiced for? What if the question's a little off and then your answer the memorized answer doesn't quite match up? So again, have your takeoff and landing and know basically what you're going to say in the meantime, and let it roll, and you'll be it'll be more natural and hopefully more comfortable for you and for the person on the other end as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I remember when we were chatting for the article, one of the things that really stood out to me was that you also need to be open to accepting that feedback. So if you're going to sit down and practice with someone, but you are closed off and aren't really willing to accept their suggestions for improvement, then it's not, you've wasted everybody's time. So making sure that you're open to accepting and receiving that feedback and actually making the adjustments.
Absolutely. Because like to our point earlier, we're not perfect. I have a coach. I have people who help me out, even though I teach this and train other people, right? Think of the person you maybe admire the most, whether it's a scientist or a performer of some sort or an athlete, they all have coaches. So, right, it makes sense that we would want and need a coach too. And that means, to Amber's point, that we're accepting their feedback graciously because they've offered to help us, and then doing something about it. Not just, oh, okay, I hear that, but actually doing something about it to elevate our communication. Thank you, Amber. I'm glad you brought that up.
Oh, absolutely. It was a key point, and one I've tried to keep in mind since I feel I'm often not so great at accepting criticism and trying to incorporate it into my life. It's definitely something I work on, and I think most humans are working on graciously accepting any kind of feedback. All right. I want to return before we conclude to this silver platter concept. So what happens if you still have a luscious cupcake still left on your beautiful silver platter? Somehow in the course of this whole conversation, you did not get to bring up one of your main 3 values. So Sheila, can you take us through some strategies for handling this possibility if we have this delicious cupcake still waiting to be delivered?
I think you keep saying that. I think I'm going to have dessert after we're done here today.
100%.
It is 100% up to you to, at the end, if you haven't gotten everything in that you feel is pertinent to the conversation, to come up with some sort of strategy or some sort of verbiage that is natural to you. Hey, Mr. Jones, I would be remiss if I said goodbye without letting you know X, this story or this thing about me. Whatever the language is that is comfortable and natural to you, the word remiss could be a good one here. But if you say, wow, I would never say that, then don't say the word remiss, right? I'd like to let you know one other thing that we haven't gotten to today, or hey, Mr. Jones, we've talked about a lot today and I appreciate your time. One thing that we haven't gotten to that I'd really like to tell you about is just a quick little story about X or whatever it is. Again, the telling the point isn't necessarily where we have the challenge. The challenge comes in speaking up and inserting ourselves at the end like that. So think about 1 or 2 ways that you might be able to, and again, this is something you'll want to practice with your partner. When they're saying, well, hey, Thomas, thank you so much for the interview. We really appreciate it. We'll get, oh, Mr. Jones, right? And just getting that assertiveness going. And sometimes that can be really, really challenging. So we'll want to practice that. And then make sure that what you say is condensed and to the point after that, so that we're not then belaboring it for another 2 to 3 minutes. There's this one point that I feel is really pertinent, or I really wanted you to know about, that sort of thing. And then to the other side of the slide there, making sure that we don't kind of melt at the end. Okay, well, yeah, okay, it's been great. Yeah, okay, bye. Right? And we kind of just melt. So we want to keep that same strength, that same confidence. And again, this is where I advocate for standing if you can, to keep the breathing going, keep the energy flowing throughout the body so that you have that same attitude and energy that you had when you started the interview. The good news is by this point, you'll probably be so much more relaxed. Let that natural smile come out. Leave them with a really positive memory. So you started maybe a half an hour ago with a great intro and so forth, and you've told them lots of things about yourself, but we want to leave them that last impression kind of before the lens closes with a positive posture and smile and attitude, and that's what we want to punctuate this with.
Wonderful. Those are all very powerful reminders for ending an interview or a presentation. And I picked this quote up just today in that workshop that I attended, and it's from a fellow IEC, and she wants students to keep in mind and remember that interviewers are our friends, and the whole process, the conversation, it's more organic than you think. Interviewers really want you to be yourself. They're not here to judge you. They're not here to weed you out. As I said before, they're not looking for reasons to not admit you. After all, they really are in the admissions process looking for reasons to fight and advocate for you. After all, if you think about it, it's much harder to say no to a person you've met than to just that pile of paper that some other student might just be if they didn't have the opportunity to interview. So if you are presented with the opportunity, I do hope that you will feel confident To schedule that interview first, you gotta take that first step and then take the time to prepare and practice in advance so that you are ready to engage authentically in the conversation and show the interviewer how you will be an absolute asset and great community member on their college campus. And with that, I'm going to leave you with our contact information. And we are both more than happy to chat if we can help you in any way. I can assist with the college application process, everything from picking out schools, creating that balanced list, to writing the essays, to hitting the submit button, even to thinking about the financial aid components of this. And Sheila has been wonderful in working with some of my clients in helping them prepare for college interviews to really boost their confidence and, be that trusted adult who can provide that feedback so that they can really feel confident moving into that interview space. Do you have any final concluding words, Sheila?
Just that. So if we do work together, it's a pretty simple process. We can do it over Zoom. And just as Amber said, I will ask questions. We'll go through the process. We'll record it so that you can see it, because that's a real benefit to you to be able to go back and look at. I'll point out some things that went really well, because you are, as soon as we say record or video, people get, I don't really want to do that. You'll be surprised at how well you already do at most things. And then we just tweak a few things to amplify and make it both more natural and comfortable for you, and just bring out the best of your personality while you're still showcasing your competence. So it's a pretty easy process, and just a few times can really make a difference in getting you comfortable for the interview process.